And I would like to call to order this meeting of Finance Committee for April 21st, 2025. I'm Deanna Gwen, Chair.
Paul Tigan, Ward 1.
Julie Hoyt, Mayor.
Vanessa Nordyke, Ward 7.
Shane Matthews, alternate.
And then staff.
Go ahead.
I'm Callie Langenbach, Budget Manager.
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer.
James Orton Hess, analyst in the budget office.
Tammy Schweitzer, Moss Adams.
Let's go.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney.
Dana Decline.
Assistant Director. Where do I go?
I'm the coffee.
I will figure this out.
Kristen Rutherford, Director of Community Planning and Development.
Krishna Namburi, interim city manager. I will
Shannon Thomas, Finance Analyst.
Tammy Stars, Public Works Engineering.
Courtney Knox Bush, Chief Strategy Officer.
And then online, let's start with Alan.
Alan Dannon, City Engineer.
Thank you, Jenny.
Jenny Matichek, Chief Accountant.
Anya,
Anya Hill, Treasury Supervisor.
Kelly,
Kelly B, Budget Analyst.
that's everybody.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was digging for a pen. Approval of minutes. Do we have did everyone review the minutes from the last meeting, March 17th? And do we have a motion for approval of those minutes?
I would make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Do we have a second? And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Do we have anyone here for public comment?
We do not.
No action items, so on to management updates and information items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to turn it right over to Moss Adams to start with the URA performance audit. And I'll share this one.
All right, well, while Josh is getting that set up, it's good to be here with everyone in person this time. We'll be presenting the results of the Urban Renewal Agency performance audit today. On the next slide. So just as a reminder, our audit objectives were to document the sources and uses of funds for the URA. And really, we were interested in looking at the cost effectiveness of the urban renewal areas, given what's been going on with the city's budget, to understand what impact it has on the general fund and see if it is sort of working in the way that the city would anticipate. So we can go to the next slide. To do this, we conducted our work between December and April of 2025, December 2024, April 2025. We conducted interviews with city staff, and we also reviewed documents including the urban renewal area plans, annual reports, financial records, and budget documents. And then we conducted best practice research. And this audit was conducted under generally accepted government auditing standards. So go to the next slide. So to answer the primary question of sort of, is the URA working? The answer is, well, since in the period that we reviewed, the urban renewal areas have generated at least $1.1 billion in additional asset value and has leveraged $413 million in private investment to support redevelopment. So from that perspective, it sounds like, yes, it's working, right? So that's what this is showing you. We go to the next slide. We've got some additional considerations for the city, however. So that leverage, the $413 million leveraged from private investment, and then that $1.1 billion minimum in assessed value increase probably actually underestimates the value that the URA is bringing to the city, because what's not being counted is how many businesses are coming into the city as a result of that, how many jobs are being brought in, how many units of housing are being developed. those information components are not reported on a regular basis. And so it's actually an underestimation of how valuable the URA is for the city. This is something that the department is interested in being able to conduct, but it's just staff capacity has not allowed them to do this additional analysis to be able to demonstrate these other performance measures around cost-effective analysis, performance measures, things like that.
Excuse, can I ask a question? Did your analysis take into consideration if these projects were completed in the public sector without a URA? Like, what, is there a way to measure?
We call it the but-for argument. So
Right.
but-for urban renewal would this have
Right,
happened?
right.
We didn't evaluate that. We did look at what would the potential impact be on the city's general fund. So there's, because the tax increment funding sort of it levels off some of the taxes and then the remaining goes towards that additional redevelopment, we were sort of thinking, okay, well, what happens if we close the URAs? Well, yes, you'll get the additional tax money back into the general fund, but you have debt that you have to pay off for some of these items, about $13 million right now on the books. And then it's also, you're sort of having a short-term view because of the amount of investment that really does occur and the increased valuation. So it's a little bit of a trade-off on that. So we didn't look at what it would have been but for urban renewal.
And, you know, to just give you a couple of examples, so it's different urban renewal area by urban renewal area. If you look at Mill Creek, that was only feasible because of the public investment. We would not have what we have out at Mill Creek, the jobs, the assessed valuation, it would just be state land with nothing happening to it. If you look at the other urban renewal areas, they're each so unique. McGilchrist was created for one project, and that was to do the road. If you look at Riverfront, it has such a broad project list, right? That Riverfront's really kind of reinvented itself a few times, you know, from doing them all downtown. We wouldn't have had that if it weren't for urban renewal. We wouldn't have the housing, you know, this new reinvention if it weren't for the grants. So it's hard to prove that it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for urban renewal though.
And I think that there is sort of an element in that question of, okay, well, what do we do going forward with these areas? And that's where we have a finding and a recommendation around strategic planning or a strategic framework to be able to guide those upcoming decisions for the city to be able to say, well, this is what we want to get out of our URAs. This is the philosophy that we want to be able to have. You have plans for each of these areas, and as Kristen indicated, they can be revisited. But as we're sort of in this budget crisis, we need to be thinking about, well, what are we going to do with these? Because yes, you'll get additional revenue into the general fund, but you're taking away the option for that sort of expedited redevelopment that then results in greater general fund dollars down the line. So we have a finding and recommendation on that. And then the last piece that we wanted to cover with the committee today, so the URA and the city have an intergovernmental agreement for the city to be providing them with different sort of administrative function support. The way that that's currently being applied is that there's an overhead rate on each hour billed for URA staff. And that's not actually covering the city's cost for providing service to the URA because of staffing fluctuations and time being allocated to that and those fluctuations. But that doesn't mean that the administrative costs are changing as staff time changes dedicated to this. And so we've recommended that the city develop a different process to be able to capture those overhead costs to make sure that they're able to recover that from the URA. And then document it. Are there any questions about that? We can go to the next.
Excuse me, I do have a question about that. Could you go back to that slide, please? Thank you. When you say that it does not fully cover all city costs, do you have an estimate in terms of what costs are we talking about? Is this $500,000? This is $1 million? I'm just curious how much money we are talking about over in recent history based on your review.
Yep, I know that we heard a number of different numbers, and we weren't able to get the documentation because it was gonna be too time intensive, so I'll actually defer to Kelly and Kristen on estimates.
I think we're looking at a couple $1 million a year, right, the reimbursement or the general fund is picking up for UD admin.
Okay.
So the way that our cost of pay plan works and that we allocate it is a pretty old methodology. It's one that Public Works used to use, that they migrated away from, where all of the project managers like Sarah Long or Tori Banford, their base rate has additional funding attached on top of that. That's supposed to pay for my time, supposed to pay for Dina's time. When we had a bigger staff, that worked because we have more people billing out that time to projects. Our staff has shrunk significantly in the last 4 years. The methodology doesn't work anymore. So because of that, the urban renewal areas are not reimbursing the general fund. And we're, you know, have exposure to the general fund now that we really shouldn't have.
So just trying to work through that example. If, say you had 100 employees in the urban development department and you were taking a set percentage from all of them to pay for overhead costs. But now you're down to 70 employees and you're still using that same percentage, that's what the gap we're talking about.
Right.
Something
Except
like
like we're
that.
down to 3.
Right. You take a 0 away from my example, 10 employees, you know, so. Okay,
So what we're looking at doing, and we're gonna start this work this summer, is look at each urban renewal area and how much time is being spent in those urban renewal areas and do more of a direct reimbursement rather than we add hours to your time and we add hours to their time and wash it out that way. And just make it more direct.
how would you foresee that sort of intersecting with the idea that we're gonna end up closing urban renewal areas in the next couple of years? So in theory, does the amount of work go down or does,
For a while, the amount of work will still stay the
Shift.
same because we're gonna stop collecting tax increment, but we still have cash on hand. So we're still gonna be doing projects. Right, so Mill Creek, we've got a couple of years of collections left so that we can pay off our debt. If you look at something like North Gateway, we're also gonna stop collecting tax increment in, I think, 2026. We're gonna have cash on hand and we're still gonna have projects that we're gonna be doing. So think about Fairview, where we stopped collecting tax increment years ago, but we haven't closed it down because we've had this money still on hand for projects that we're kind of been waiting to use these on different projects on the airport.
Okay.
And then we've got another urban renewal area that's in the creation process right now on the North Waterfront URA.
Yeah.
And as we're closing them down, there are other areas in the community that's gonna go back to the strategic plan recommendation that how are we going to look at the creation of any future urban renewal areas? The housing production strategy is looking at using, a new type of urban renewal area that's a little bit smaller than our traditional ones. So I think there's gonna be quite a bit of work for our current staff. I don't think that there's gonna be the degree of work to grow back to what we used to be.
Kristen, just real quick, just to clarify, so the total admin cost is 2 million, or you think that's how much the general fund is subsidizing for the?
I think that's close about where we are for the subsidy.
So I just looked and in 24 it was like 1.2 million and 23 was 1.3 net their revenue.
Estimated.
So it was a little under 1%.
Yeah, but still significant.
I didn't quite catch that. Can you say that number again?
Yeah, so in 2024, fiscal year 24, it was 1.2 million and in 23 it was 1.3 million. was the net.
I'd like to discuss a little bit about the recommendation for a strategic plan and the management response to that. I was just looking at it's page 15 in the agenda packet for folks following along at home. That's the responsive management agreement. And I feel like the response, the well-written response by the staff kind of captures the theme, which is that each one of these urban renewal areas, and even the conversation about calculating the benefit, like each one of them has such a different purpose that what's sort of lacking is a cohesion between them. And it's connected to the third recommendation about communicating the value of the urban renewal program in general to the public. When we're saying, oh, well, we do it here for this reason, and we do it here for this reason, and we do it, most people don't know what it is to begin with, and when you kind of give them 7 different examples of how it's used, then there's not really a collective understanding of the benefit. Now, if we start telling people like, well, we've achieved a benefit of over $1 billion to the city's assessed value in 2 decades or something, whatever the count is. It's more than that, I suppose. I really feel like the need for a strategic plan that covers all the potential uses and really declares a vision for why we do urban development and use the authority is, to me, really striking, probably the most striking part of the audit. In terms of growing business, in terms of growing housing, welcoming innovation to the community, there's like lots of really cool overarching descriptions of why we would do urban redevelopment that could capture all of these. Because a lot of this is not compelling to the public. Like redeveloping McGilchrist isn't compelling, but there's lots of ways to describe it that would be. So I'd like the management response to say something more like, we're really excited to kick off our urban renewal strategic plan. But it doesn't quite say that. But that's just kind of my take on it. Can't see Vanessa if she's nodding violently in agreement.
I was nodding in agreement. Do you want a thumbs up? Is that more obvious? There you go.
You just looked like a spreadsheet for a second there. It wasn't your fault.
All good. I don't disagree with that, Paul. I think, I would agree that there's been, I can understand from the staff's perspective, you feel you are communicating it because you're at all of our meetings. We have separate URA meetings that are publicly noticed and on the agenda. I get that. We as counselors, we do try, at least I try, and I think everyone here probably tries to explain what these URAs are for. But yeah, it takes more messaging and it takes repetition. Every time you feel like you've said it enough, you haven't. I would know that because that's been my experience when I go to neighborhood groups. They need reminders of the value. And I'm excited to share some of the mic drop moments that you had at the beginning of this presentation on how much economic activity has been inspired and leveraged from URA. But yeah, I like the idea of having a strategic plan for sure, because just looking at the map, it can seem willy-nilly when I know it is not. But how do you explain that it's not willy-nilly? How do we identify which places get URAs and which don't? I feel like Northeast Salem probably feels ignored in a lot of respects, and whether that's and that sentiment is something that counselors for the Northeast area need to help explain, but there's always a city staff role for those conversations.
Well, fortunately, we have Dana with us now as our new assistant director. of Urban development, who has lived and breathed communicating urban renewal for the last many years.
Many years, yeah.
Yep.
For sure. I think this is great. We can totally, I mean, there is a lot differences between the current URAs and then as you start to look at how we could use it long-term, I think it makes sense that we have a strategic plan. It's just trying to figure out, do we try to staff up or do we try to figure out a way to either a consultant help us or, you know, do a staff paper? And I think we can do it in multiple ways. So I think it's a good flag for sure.
I'll just add too that we're looking at a larger strategic planning effort for the city. And so we could consider urban renewal as one of the economic development tools that we have.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Council serves as urban renewal agency board as well as Salem Housing Authority Commission. As elected bodies in consultation with the community, you may develop a vision for how all of these things work together. I think on occasion, staff have imagined, wow, we're getting council direction around housing. Let's start using urban renewal to help housing. Let's use bond money to help housing. So you can see those things being connected by staff, taking a pause and having a broader community conversation about vision for our community is sort of the next step. So there may be an opportunity to create alignment around each of the funding sources that we can bring to bear to support the policy direction of the council, SHA, commission and URA work.
Thank
Did
you
you
for
have
saying that
something?
for, oh, sorry. So I was going to say that also helps with decision making, right? I think it's kind of important to start with that overall strategy. And
Did you have something?
Yeah, I think the other point I wanted to bring up that I read in the audit that I felt like deserves attention for the finance committee in general and maybe to the council as a whole is talking about performance management. So I think that's in the second the second outcome or recommendation. So on agenda packet, page 18 and page 19. I really appreciated the list of different performance measures that were listed here, but also identifying a really big gap. So your report did demonstrate tax-based growth, leverage ratio, but the things that that we don't track right now, new housing units, which is something that everyone is asking us for, and we're using this authority to meet that public demand, but we don't have a way to talk about it with the authority. New businesses and employment, I'm thinking about what the Chamber of Commerce CEO said at our public forum about the tax, the levy last week, and we have the 48th worst state in the country for new business growth. But we're trying to use this authority to seed new businesses, but we don't have a way to say that it's actually happening. And so to me, that's a gap that we could close and be able to demonstrate like, yeah, this is a tough state to start a business, but this is the way that the city helps. We don't have numbers to say that. And certainly retail is kind of connected to that, but I just know as a city that we lack a relationship. I know that have people who talked about a business registry or something like that, but we lack a way to communicate with our new businesses in the city to know that they're there, to know that they're being founded. And to me, this is another reason why we should find a way to have that relationship, because we can also demonstrate the value of the investments that we're making on behalf of the business community. So I really appreciated that being called out as a possible performance measure here.
Anybody else have any questions? I know you are the alternate, but did you have any questions, Shane?
It has to be an alternate opinion now. So like you can't disagree with things that we said.
I guess I did have just one question when I was looking back at the URAs, and I'm sure there's a reason for this, but so like looking at the Fairview one, we stopped collecting in 2024. And so it sounds like, my assumption was the reason we kind of keep it open is because we need to spend out the money before we can basically close it, but it doesn't sound like that's the case,
No, it is.
That is the case, so
It
we
is.
stopped collecting tax increment,
right?
so that money is back to the city and to all the affected taxing districts.
Okay,
It's
so,
still technically on the books as long as we've got that money to spend.
okay, but we are collecting money for the general fund from the taxing district, even though it's technically still in our system. Okay, okay, that was the only thing that I kind of picked out.
And that will be happening with McGillcrest, so we hit maximum indebtedness on McGillcrest in 2024. And so with the upcoming fiscal year, then we will stop collecting tax increment.
And general fund will start seeing the benefit.
Right, and we sometimes we use the word close and we don't mean close, but people understand that a little bit better than, hey, we're gonna start collecting tax increment. It doesn't roll off the tongue very well, so.
Okay.
But we wouldn't be able to, until it is actually closed, it's gonna be on the books as part of our 10% calculation of acreage or the other limits in terms of how much urban development.
Once we stop collecting increment, so like for Fairview.
Yeah.
Will you explain what
that-
that means, collecting increment, just.
Sure, so that's the revenue that's generated within the urban renewal boundary above the frozen base. And the frozen base is the assessed valuation that exists at the time the urban renewal area is adopted. Okay, so any new tax increment, whether it's the 3% a year or whether it's from new development, that comes to the urban renewal agency. So with Fairview, when you stop collecting the tax increment, that acreage is back in the pool, it's
Okay.
available.
Great. I wouldn't want to create a system where the incentive would be just get rid of the money at the end because you want to do something else, so.
I have one thing on my mind. I thought I read what was the 1.1 billion? And that is what it brings to us.
The 1.1 billion is the difference between the valuation at the time that the URA is established and what the current valuation is. So it's the increase in assessed valuation across all of the urban renewal areas.
And when I heard you say that, and maybe I'm a little sensitive to this during budget season, I thought, oh, wow, we have a lot of money.
That's the increase in the value of other people's property. You know, none of that is city property. That's all the property of private individuals who've bought property in that urban renewal area and turned it into something.
Yeah.
So if they bought it, it was worth $200,000 when it was open. And they've made the investments in it and now it's worth $750,000. That's not benefit to the city. That's benefit to that individual or that company that's been engineered by the city. We were the ones who, in theory, created the energy for that growth.
And then at the end, when it's 750,000,
Come back to
and
the
then it
general
comes back to the general fund, it comes back at $750,000 that's taxable rather than $200,000 that's taxable.
Counselor Nordike, did you have a question?
Right.
Yes, I did. And going back to the 1.1 billion in assessed valuation, is that only for the properties with, I know a URA can be a big area, like the downtown one. That increase in assessed valuation, is that for all properties within the URAs, even if they did not specifically request funds? Because I can imagine if you tidy up one building on the block, that can improve the value and attractiveness of all the buildings on the block. So I'm just curious, are all the buildings in the URA taken into consideration for this increase in assessed valuation?
Is that, yeah, so.
Yes.
You know, and that number also reflects taking like Mill Creek, which had a valuation of about 0 to hundreds of millions.
Courtney, did you have something to add?
Well, I was gonna ask Kristen to speak a little bit about Mill Creek and its condition at the time an urban renewal area was created, and then you've just done a little, but I think it might help to have a little bit more background about what urban renewal is, what conditions of light might be in for ORS 457, just a little bit more contextual.
How are we doing on time?
We're getting a little tight, but we're okay.
Okay,
We can
Go
go
ahead.
into this tonight too, if you feel like you're running out of time.
why don't we, like, briefly now?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so in Mill Creek, it was greenfield. There was no infrastructure. So the urban renewal investment put in sewer, water, roads, stormwater detention, wetland facilities to make sites like site ready for development. So we're looking at just in the urban renewal investment, 25 million, but there was also a special DDF for that area, which is an SDC, but just for that area, okay? There was development money from the state and from the developers that went into that, so, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars that went in to build up the infrastructure. And then hundreds, like 100 million for the infrastructure, but hundreds of millions of new facilities and new jobs that went in there that wouldn't have happened without using this tool to make those sites ready. Okay. So that's one application that's allowed under statute. So blight can be the absence of infrastructure. That's blight finding for Mill Creek. If you're looking at downtown, a blight finding would be buildings that have been vacant for a long time. You know, what we tend to think of as blight, you know, that standard definition of boarded up windows and low occupancy, that sort of thing. So in that kind of environment, grants for redevelopment, grants for adaptive reuse, those stimulate new development, redevelopment, finding tenants. Most of the properties within downtown that have had, you know, any degree of vacancy will make use of grants to help attract tenants and address vacancy. I'll just give you those two examples because they're kind of a combination of those two in other urban renewal areas. Your time.
no, are you ready for performance audit program update?
Absolutely, and we're gonna stick with Tammy for a minute. This next piece also.
Great, and this is gonna be quick. So performance audits, we're doing this series to be able to look at efficiency, effectiveness, and the use of resources across the city. And this committee has been shaping which topics are being audited. Go to the next slide. And this was the criteria that was approved by the finance committee to determine which projects would be evaluated. So these were the things that sort of came out of that discussion, was we wanted it to be based on general fund, based on efficiency, cost saving opportunities, based on program budget and FTE, enterprise impact, align with strategic goals, looking at service or mandated by law. And then the next slide shows our annual progress. So 2 out of the 3 performance audits are complete. So we've already reviewed the enterprise leadership performance audit. We just reviewed the urban renewal agency performance audit. And we are now in progress on the risk management audit. We anticipate being able to complete that audit at the end of this fiscal year. Any questions?
Okay, do we need to do anything with that?
That was a quick one.
Okay.
Just an update.
And then, so next is capital improvement plan.
That is correct.
Hey, folks, I'm going to declare an actual conflict of interest when it comes to CIP because my family owns property within the CIP. So I'm going to sign off because I don't know how else to step away when it comes to a Zoom. So do we have any business after this? I see continued business or new business. I'm just wondering if there's any other reason for me to stick around after discussion with CIP today.
No, this is the last piece of formal business.
Okay, I'm going to sign off, and if you need me to come back after you've concluded your discussion of CIP for any reason, just text my city cell. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, hello everyone, my name is James Orton Hess and I'm an analyst in the budget office. Every year I sort of do this, but this committee was sort of identified as the lead committee in Council Policy C9, which was just revised last year. So we're coming to you before we could do our usual public hearing on Wednesday, the budget committee. So first, I usually sort of say what a CIP is and what a CIP isn't. So a CIP is a financial plan that spans 5 years. And that's really helpful when we're talking about projects that span multiple fiscal years. So the yearly budget sort of doesn't take into account the full life cycle cost of a project. It's governed by Council Policy C9, which I just discussed, that has recently been amended. And one of the reasons we adopt a CIP, in addition to just the planning aspect of it, is that it's required by state statute in order to levy SDCs. So the CIP meets the requirement for that. So like I said, what a CIP is it takes into account the 5 years, so 2026 through 2030. It only includes projects that have identified funding, so projects or issues, as engineering calls them, that don't have funding are excluded from the CIP. Only once the funding is identified is an included document. And it's only projects $100,000 or more. As I mentioned, we just revised the policy. It used to be 50. This will be the first CIP where it's $100,000.
Just for clarity, I think it was 50,000 since 2009.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a gap.
Yeah. And then it's only new funding. So there's a lot of projects that have been approved in the past that are still in the budget, but they're not in the CIP. And to that point, so when we talk about the difference between the budget and the CIP, in the budget, we have a whole section called capital improvements. That includes the first year of the CIP, but it also includes carryover projects, projects we adopted mid-year, reappropriations from previous years, and then all the projects that are below $100,000. There's a lot of projects in the construction fund that just don't meet the CIP threshold, but they're still capital projects. So those, and then there's some administrative costs that aren't projects per se, but they do come out of the capital. And then just how to read the document. I'm just going to go through most of the CIP is little project pages that look like this. So in the top left, there's the project number. That's the unique identifier of each project, followed by the category, in this case, streets, the neighborhood association or neighborhood associations that the project's in, and then followed by the title. And then in the top right is a score. There's a whole scoring process. I think Tammy was here last month and sort of went into that a little bit. But if there is a score, it will be in the top right, and then the ward or awards that the project's in. And then the middle is the sort of financial planning section. So on the top row is the fiscal year that the project occurs in, the funding source or funding sources that make up that project. And then the totals for both every year, and then the total for the CIP, followed by any previous CIP amounts and the total estimated project cost. And the very bottom is just a short description of everything. So a really quick lowdown on what's in the CIP. $413.9 million over the 5 years. That's 156 unique projects, 26 funding sources in 10 categories of infrastructure. On page 13 of the CIP, you'll see the CIP broken down into our result areas. As you can imagine, most of it is strong, safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure. There's some good governance. That little blip in orange there is this building. So you can see it that way. Another way to look at it is by funding source. The largest, we call it the GOCI bond, but that's the 2022 safety and liability bond, and utility rates followed by SDCs and the URA. And then also by project type, the vast majority of projects are either utility or transportation. The community facilities includes parks, and municipal facilities is larger than usual this year.
So I'm sorry, those numbers are for 2026.
This is for the
across
of the 5 years.
The 5 years, okay.
And you see a lot of variation. So like I did this before James, and there were years where we were down like 0.5% in some of those. It just depends on what cycle we're at with funding and funding sources. So it's not unusual to see some pretty big fluctuations there.
And then just really quick, There's 27.3 million in community facilities, that's 3 historic structures projects and 32 parks projects. 69.7 million in municipal facilities, that's 6 airport projects, 6 building projects, and then 10 IT projects. 161 million in transportation projects, 2 streetlight projects, and 38 streets projects. And 156 million in utilities, 14 stormwater projects, 23 wastewater projects, and 22 water projects. So that is my presentation. There's staff here, they can answer questions about specific projects, or I'm happy to take any system-wide questions.
What's a water project? It just said water.
So water infrastructure, so think Garen Island all the way to people's houses, so the whole infrastructure piece. All the pipes. Lots and lots.
Water reservoirs, water lines.
And improvements to Garen Island, right? Yep.
Can you pull the presentation back up? I just have a question about one of the slides. You can go back to the example slide, the Pringle Creek slide. No, I'm talking necessarily about Pringle Creek in particular, but just sort of how this information's displayed. I feel like this has, in this 6 years I spent on budget committee and now on council, this has improved year over year over year. Like, I think the information gets clearer. One of the questions we never talked about in the budget committee, maybe because it wasn't quite budgeting, but so this year we're gonna take 425,000 or accept from these 2 sources, the bond and the highway for the project this year. And that's gonna be added to the amount that's funded in prior years. So now we've got like $3.5 million for this project. Well, I guess maybe it is particular, one question in particular that is how much of that $3.1 million has been spent? And the second question is, and this is kind of a dumb question, but like, where does it go when it hasn't been spent? It's sitting in a bank account somewhere, it's money that's been collected, it's grant funding that is sitting in the city's financial control. Like where does that $3.1 million sit right now?
Really good question.
I can answer part of it.
Okay.
So of the 3.1 million, so we have a $6 million grant for Pringle Creek, the path. And so that is a reimbursement grant, so we need the authority to spend, right? So that's not cash in the bank, but we have to have the authority. So the 3.1 million, I believe, now don't quote me, but
Sure.
about 400,000, 350,000 has been spent so far since the project has been created. So we're-
And like planning and engineering
yes, and starting design, going out for an RFP. I don't think they've done that yet, but I think they're gearing up for that to go out for a designer.
Okay.
So so of the GO bond, there is some money in that prior year funding that is pretty much all cash, and some of it is.
It's money we bonded for, we've accepted it, it's sitting in a bank.
And some of it is authority, the grant authority, because we got 6 million. So part of that 3.1 million, if you take 3.1 million, we got 6 million. And we're gonna fund it now with 4.1 million. So some of that 3.1 is part of the 6 million grant.
So let me just see if I can test my own knowledge, my understanding here. You're saying that some of it is actual cash that we've gone out into the bond market and got and put into a bank account where it might be like collecting interest. But then some part of it, maybe over $2 million, isn't even really money.
Right.
It's just a promise for the city. It's just authority to spend $2 million. And the granting agency needs to see that in order to give us the money. So like, we never talked about this in budget committee, it's clear why, because it would take us until midnight to figure it out. But that's actually pretty fascinating. It looks like we're sitting on $3.1 million, but really what we're quote unquote sitting on, and it means we have a plan for it, is like $400,000.
Yeah, and just to add just a little bit, I mean, this is something I've made a concentrated effort at, and Tim can tell you, and Kristen and her team can tell you, that I've been a little bit annoying about it. Cause a lot of times we sit on a lot of money and we tend to budget for all of it. So if you look in the budget book, you'll see that, the revenues actually don't match, the expenditures, because we're trying to budget for just what we're actually gonna spend. Which is a challenge. You know, our idea of capacity is always much larger than our actual capacity to deliver the project. So if there's no intent, no ability to actually use the project, that money is going to sit in the bank account. It's gonna be invested, it's gonna collect interest, and we'll bring back to the portfolio for the project. But we're not gonna budget for it, we're not gonna spend it. So if it is in that amount funded in prior years, and it hasn't already been spent, it's sitting in the bank account. But that nuance isn't in the CIP, it'll be in the budget book where you can see the budgeted revenues and the budgeted expenditures.
I bring this up for the group because I mean, I think there's always ways to improve the communication about this too. I think sometimes in the past, people have seen they see the projects move through the CIP without seeing the project being completed. And they're like, where's all that money? It seems like we're sitting, there must be some bank account with $500 million in it for all the things that were included in the CIP. And they might not understand how the CIP works. The last 4 years are a concept. The first year is what's actually real. But then there's also this idea that, well, some things have gotten into that first year and have been put aside. So I think actually this is a really good example then of a shortcoming of the communication, because it looks like somewhere there's $3 million waiting to be spent. And maybe there is, but it's not under the city's control.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuanced, which is why I think you're right, why we haven't really taken that step, because it can be really confusing when people see the project and they don't actually see the project.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've talked with Public Works Engineering about expanding our, call it a, project dashboard, where you can actually see, like, hey, it's in design, it's in construction, or it's just funded, but it's not actually planned for construction. We're not there yet. It's certainly
We
something.
put that in the budget book.
Yeah, brand new.
We did, it's new this year. So you'll see on the construction pages, sorry, Josh. But there's a status, there's a project status. So you can see in the pages what phase the projects are in, and it's not on every page. Some categories we don't have that information for, but the utility projects, we did have that.
All kindness, please forgive what I'm about to say. Not everybody reads the budget book. And we also have other tools to communicate. And so I know that there have been some improvements as well in the web world, where you can actually find out what's going on with a different project by your neighborhood or by your ward. So you can actually, it's almost-ish real time. It's updated frequently, so you can get a sense of where we are on any individual project that way too. So it's fabulous that it's in this wonderfully large book that is accessible once a year, but it's also every day updated on the website.
I mean, it's an example of how we try to continuously improve, and still, we're not quite there, but
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I just I bring it up just as trying to get some clarity when those numbers just kind of sit out there and people go through the CIP and they'll do this in next week. Or that's not next week, that's Wednesday. They'll, do the math in their head and they'll be like, wow, I'm up to just flipping through the pages here. The city's sitting on $100 million. And so I think it requires people who know to be able to explain, A, that's not all of that money is real. B, none of it is general fund. We can't cancel those projects and fill the budget gap. But I think just in a bid for transparency, we added that line. How much is in the project so far? And then it also asks the next question, like, how much are we sitting on? So.
I just wanted to ask, so you just mentioned none of it's general fund, and so I was looking at the funding source, and 16% of it is all others, and that's like 74 million. And so is any of that in from general fund, or is that really not?
There's a little bit, and if you have your CIP document, they're paid
Page 12.
Page 12 lists the funding source. So there's some different dollars there.
But not, it's like 1.1 million over the course of
Oh,
the fire system.
So I mean, it's very, very minimal.
Yeah.
And I think most of that is
IT, I see, it
IT and
is.
facilities.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You know, so like HVAC replacements, believe it or not, they need to be replaced eventually, so there's.
Server storage arrays, you know. Big capital outlays that don't really fit in budget targets for the general fund.
Yeah, so they do appear in the CIP, we try not to put them in operating budgets because it creates strange fluctuations. So they get transferred out of non-departmental, just like those transfers.
There might be other questions like this, though, to lead off the presentation on Wednesday night with, so here we go, you know, taking a step away from the general fund for a bit. Point to that 1.1 million hit. We can, you know, other advice, suggestions you have to help people who are following along. Please share.
Any questions?
I'm done with
Any-
questions.
Good ones.
I will certainly have available the breakdown for the 1.1, what projects those are for the general fund, just given the heightened sense of awareness there, especially this year. Anything else you think would be helpful to highlight? I'm not sure how much we want to delve into.
Don't go there. Feed Titan's long-range curiosity.
So nothing that anyone else has? Josh, I'm looking at you.
Oh, no, nothing more from staff.
So we are adjourned?